Hello, I'm Doug Stanton, one of the co-founders of the National Writer Series, and I'm here at the City Opera House in Traverse City, Michigan, our home for NWS. I wanted to welcome you this evening. I was going to do this from home, but I decided to come down to the stage here where we've had so many great conversations and so many wonderful memories. And I just wanted to say we're excited to come back. We'll see you again soon, but most of all, thank you for being there tonight. Enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome to the National Writer Series. I'm Jillian Manning, the Executive Director here at NWS, and I'm so pleased to introduce our guest for tonight, Chris Bohjalian. Chris is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 22 books, including The Flight Attendant, which is now an HBO hit series, Midwives, and The Sandcastle Girls, just to name a few. Tonight, we are the first stop on Chris's tour for his latest book, The Hour of the Witch, a twisting novel about a young Puritan woman who petitions for divorce from her abusive husband, only to end up on trial for witchcraft. Despite being set on the eve of the Salem Witch Trials more than 350 years ago, this is a timely exploration of love, fear, and feminine power. And speaking of feminine power, we have the incomparable Crystal Frost joining us tonight as our guest host. Crystal is a local media personality known for her show on WTCM and a dedicated volunteer with organizations like Traverse Bay Children's Advocacy Center and Parallel 45 Theater. We look forward to spending the coming hour with you. Please join me in welcoming Chris Bohjalian and Crystal Frost.
Good evening. I'm Crystal Frost, and I'd like to welcome you to the National Writer Series. I'm so excited to have you join us today as we welcome Chris Bohjalian. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Crystal.
Now, Chris, obviously, this is your 22nd book. I think this is the 21st book that you have written. You are no stranger to suspense. You are no stranger to the spotlight. As Jillian had mentioned, your work has been translated into 35 languages. You have the 2018 novel, The Flight Attendant, that has, now an HBO Max television series that everyone seems to love and is talking about. It's amazing. How are you coming up with these new ideas? You go from a flight attendant and then, starting to work on a novel based in the 17th century about a Puritan woman named Mary Deering, who unfortunately lives without a whole lot of power. So tell us a little bit about coming up with this idea to write Hour of the Witch.
Sure. I have always been obsessed with Puritan theology, going all the way back to college. Imagine a world where Satan is as real as your neighbor. Imagine where every waking moment you are wondering, am I damned or am I saved? So I wanted to write a book about this world and this level of introspection. I mean, no one has as much anxiety as I have. But I didn't want to write just another witch book. There have been a lot of witch books. I came across an obscure 3-line reference from 1672 in Boston's Court of Assistants to a divorce for what today we would call domestic violence, cruelty. And I did this deep dive into Puritan divorce. And I discovered that 31 times Puritan couples divorced. And there were 5 reasons why you could divorce: polygamy, desertion, adultery, and you will love this when you think of what we think of the Puritans, impotence, and then one time, cruelty, domestic violence. And that was my way in. Now, whenever we think of witchcraft in America, we go right to 1692 in Salem. But 30 years before Salem, Hartford was hanging witches. In 1656, the governor of Massachusetts had his own sister-in-law, Anne Hibbins, hanged as a witch. And so I began to wonder, what kind of woman would be so strong, smart, and opinionated that she would take on the patriarchy to escape this unbelievably toxic marriage? And I was off and running.
Yeah, I was reading that you actually had come across the story of, I think it was Nanny, was it Nanny Naylor? Who was
Elizabeth Nanny Naylor.
The first Puritan divorce, and as
Not the first divorce, the first for domestic violence.
yes, for domestic violence. And as we're reading through Hour of the Witch, it could not escape me. I mean, obviously, this is set in the 1600s. Things are very different. You mentioned, just the idea of witchcraft in general, which everything seemed to have a purpose. Everything had a motive. If you were barren, for example, obviously you did something and God was punishing you for it. Or, if your crops didn't grow, there was something wrong with you. So, I mean, people were walking around possibly in constant fear. And I realized, though, with the subject matter of misogyny and of, patriarchal dominance, these are things that still exist today.
Oh, yeah. The alternative title for this novel was #I Believe Her.
Yeah. And even at one point, one of the magistrates during this this story refers to Mary Deering as a nasty woman. And as a woman from Michigan, where I have my own governor, Gretchen Whitmer, called a nasty woman, that's
And a witch. Oh my gosh. Senator Ron Johnson called your governor a witch a couple of weeks ago.
yeah, it's unbelievable to me that is that's something that that was so apparent that it's still happening now. And I mean, when you were writing this, I can only imagine what you have to do. And I'd love to ask you about this. When you dive into Puritan culture, when you're speaking about Puritan culture, and even the way the book reads is "Thou dost much protest," these types of things, you have to really engage yourself in this. And yet knowing that this is still something that's going on today, how were you able to really immerse yourself in this culture, even with the back of your mind going, this is the kind of misogyny that we're dealing with every single day?
I wanted to walk a tightrope. And the tightrope was this. On the one hand, I wanted the book to feel unbelievably authentic. I wanted my readers to feel the dark claustrophobia of Boston in 1662, a world where most of the houses didn't have stairways. They had ladders. A world where they built this massive 2-story townhouse that was to them the Empire State Building. A world where the ships would come to port And it would be an unbelievably big deal because, oh my God, we're going to have spices and books from England. And thank God we're going to have Madeira, so we don't have to drink beer for the next 6 months. But I also wanted the book to be timely. I was writing a lot of this book in 2018, in 2019. And so, yes, there was a lot of this moment that Harvey Weinstein is a thing. Harvey Weinstein is a predator. Mary Deerfield's husband is a predator. And so when I was writing this book, I wanted, on the one hand, my readers to think, yes, it's 1662, but it's also 2021.
Absolutely. You mentioned the ships coming in, and there is there's one of the materials that comes in from London that plays a major role in this book is the fork, three-tined utensil. And as I'm very good, as I'm reading this and I'm realizing, and I had to step back and think, the Puritans and the people living in the New World at that time were even resistant against using a fork to, as a better means to eat because of those three tines. And that was a part of, that was the devil's cutlery, basically. You're inviting the devil into your home if you are using this utensil. Why did you decide to use a fork as a major role in this book?
Yeah. I mean, there's a rabbit hole. As a novelist, you always go down when you're researching a book. John Gardner taught us that you never want to wake the reader from the fictional dream. That's important. And one of the things I came across was, yes, the Puritans didn't trust the fork. It looked too much like the devil's pitchfork. The Puritans clearly had atrocious table manners. They didn't use forks. They drank beer like it's spring break in Miami. And they did have plates. But for casual dining, they shared trenchers. Imagine a pig's trough that, a husband and wife would share. 2 or 3 people would share. And so I began to think about the notion of the fork as a weapon, not merely a weapon of domestic violence, but a weapon of the male patriarchy. If you want to impugn the character of a woman. And when I came across 2 references, one, the Puritans sometimes called the fork the devil's tines, and 2, Puritan worthy John Winthrop brought one from England, but would never use it publicly. I was off and running.
Yeah. Speaking of how you write about women, one common theme that I find in your books, you often tell stories from the female perspective. You're often telling stories from, books about injustice from a female's perspective. How is it that you're able to capture women almost so effortlessly and tell these stories through their gaze, and you nail it. I mean, quite frankly, you nail it.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm going to answer your second question first. Once when I was in Salem, a docent at a museum told the worst joke ever. But there's a point to it. The joke was this: how many women did we burn as witches? And the answer, 0. We hanged them. if you wanted to be hanged as a witch in the 17th century in Boston, you needed to be smart, strong-willed, and opinionated. I mean, Anne Hutchinson, antinomian, not hanged, but exiled to Rhode Island by John Winthrop. Why? Because she was smart, strong, and opinionated. Mary Deerfield, my heroine, is strong, smart, and opinionated. Now, why do I succeed? And thank you for saying so, at conveying these women well. First of all, my lovely bride, Victoria Bluer, we've been together since we were 18 years old, and she has read every word I have written since we were 18. And I remember one time when clearly I was not taking her criticism well. She said, "Wouldn't you rather hear it from me than the New York Times?" And our daughter, Grace Experience, now a young actor, has been reading my work since she was in 8th grade, and she's really astute. She was the one who said to me when she was 19, and she's now narrated all or parts of 5 of my books. She said, "Dad, take this as a compliment, but I think your sweet spot as a writer is seriously messed up young women."
Yeah.
She too is a great guide. And, I've had the same editor since 2010, Jenny Jackson. And when I approached her to be my editor, I said, I want you because you're younger than me and you're smarter than me. And that's important. And, they stopped me from killing again.
As far as this novel is concerned, historical fiction, you really love, getting into the 17th century and researching the Puritans. But you've also written contemporary fiction. What do you prefer writing?
It's not that I prefer contemporary or historical fiction. I've written 4 novels that are historical fiction and 18 that are set in the present. What I love most is dread. I don't care if it's the Armenian genocide in 1915. I don't care if it's international thrillers like The Flight Attendant. I want dread. I want readers to be turning the pages with a definite sense of, oh dear God, what is he going to do to this woman or this man? And I want a book that ends with one of 2 things: heartbreak or happiness. There is no in between. I can write a book that's 400 pages long and imagine a gymnast's floor routine. The ending is the landing. If you don't stick the landing, the 395 pages that preceded the ending are an epic flop. It's all about the ending. Is it heartbreak? Is it happiness? Do you stick the landing? I mean, I got to tell you, I would have killed Harry Potter at the end of book 7 because it would have broken my heart.
Yeah, heartbreak or happiness. That seems to work. There's only 2 endings. You have written 22 books. Your latest novel you wrote during the pandemic, and I want to get to that in a bit. But do these characters stay with you? Do you think about Mary Deerfield and where she is now? And I wonder that because you have such compelling characters. You truly do. And I wonder if you're able to, as soon as you finish that book, you're able to put them to rest and you can move forward.
It's a great question. if the book is a train wreck,
Mm.
and I've written some bad books. I mean,
Can you
imagine a Detroit Tigers starting pitcher.
Yeah.
He goes to the mound 30 times in a season. Of those 30 times, he might win if he's really good, 20.
Mm.
But he's still going to lose 5 times and have 5 no decisions. Of my 22 books, some are pretty good, some are losses, and some are no decisions. When a book is a loss or a no decision, I can put the character aside.
Mm.
But when the book works, the characters stay with me. Navart, Hatun from the Sandcastle Girls, Uri from Skeletons at the Feast, Cassie Bowden from The Flight Attendant, Alexis Remnick from The Red Lotus, and yes, Mary Deerfield from Hour of the Witch. They will stay with me.
Hmm.
I will worry about them. I will wonder where they are. Now, I will never write a sequel,
Mm-hmm.
which is fascinating when you realize that The Flight Attendant became this really wonderful TV series.
Yeah.
Kaylee Cuoco is a rock star as Cassie Bowden. She's just fantastic. But there's going to be a season 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea where season 2 is going to go. And I can't wait to see it.
So that doesn't worry you when someone
Not-
else is taking your character and taking her into new places.
Not in the slightest.
Wow.
Before they started filming The Flight Attendant, I had a great time with Kaylee Cuoco and Steve Yockey,
Mm-hmm.
the showrunner, talking about my vision and what's involved if we're going to get a season 2. And it was great, but they are so darn smart and so many steps ahead of me
Mm-hmm.
that, I have complete faith. Before The Flight Attendant, I had 3 movies, and it's a different medium. I love them.
Yeah.
I love TV series, and it's fine. Now, I am writing 2 other TV series based on my books,
Okay.
and that's great. But it's a different skill set. And I think about the book, but more than that, I think about what are the TV series I love.
Yeah. You have been critics have described you and remarked that you never write the same book twice. And yet I feel like there's always something that readers can find when they are, reading one of your books. A Chris Bohjalian novel, it's going to be different every time, but there's also this secret recipe in there that if I read, The Flight Attendant and then I pick up Hour of the Witch, 2 drastically different books, but it has there's some secret ingredient. What is that ingredient?
Dread.
Yeah.
My father died, and I was going through his home. I came across a sweater box under his bed, and in it were all of the short stories I wrote in the 3rd and 4th grade.
Wow.
My mother had saved them. And then after she died years and years ago, my father had saved them. And this is the oldest short story I ever wrote in existence. 3rd grade. And, the penmanship is really good.
It's actually really good. Yeah.
It is good. But the story is a train wreck. But I went to dread.
Even in 3rd grade.
Even when I was 8 and 9 years old. This is the last sentence of the oldest short story I ever wrote. The dripping stopped, and the vultures had their meal. So even when my books have a happy ending, before you get there, expect a whole lot of dread. That is the secret sauce.
I would love to ask you a little more, but I'm kind of frightened at the same time. Why are you so comfortable with dread?
I'm a mess. I mean, I'm right now dealing with a mindfulness guru.
Hmm.
And he said to me the other day, I've been doing this 40 years and I've never met anyone like you. Your mind never stops channeling anxiety. You are incapable of turning it off. And that's just who I am. And so a pandemic, oh my God, by the time this pandemic is over, we will have lost the equivalent population of the state of Vermont. My daughter's an actor. In February of 2020, her career was blossoming. Prior to the pandemic, Crystal, we would be sitting in 2 chairs in the opera house.
Yeah.
There would be a packed auditorium. There'd be these Aquafina bottles of water, and we'd be having a great time. I'd be throwing t-shirts into the audience. And now, this is where we are. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you, Pfizer. Thank you, Moderna. Thank you, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. We will be back. But just look at the last year. I mean, I had a book come out in March of 2020 called The Red Lotus about a pathogen and a pandemic.
Wow.
And I can remember we canceled the book tour on March 13th, 2020, and doing all of these virtual events. And somebody said to me, okay, you've interviewed a dozen epidemiologists and scientists. What's going to happen? And expert that I am, I said, well, based on the 1957 flu pandemic, it could be bad. 70,000 Americans could die. One of the guys I interviewed was on 60 Minutes a few weeks later. None of us knew how bad this would be. Moreover, none of us knew that it would become this weird political issue where all of a sudden a pathogen would be politicized. I mean, my God, think last autumn of the Michigan State House. What in the world was happening?
Yeah. I want to ask you about your book that you wrote during the pandemic, and specifically since you love dread. Did dread take on a new meaning when you are in the middle of a global pandemic and you're trying to write this book? Are we going to see even more dread in the next novel that's coming out?
I was really lucky. I was unbelievably lucky because I knew what my next book was going to be in 2019. And so in November and December of 2019, I was in Africa researching it. I did all of my research in the Serengeti before the pandemic. So in 2020, I had done my homework and I had the best time because my next book isn't set in the present. Many of you have seen the great Quentin Tarantino movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
That was the inspiration. My 2022 book is set in 1964 in Hollywood and Africa.
Wow.
It's about an Elizabeth Taylor-like starlet who brings her wedding entourage with her on a honeymoon safari. And one by one, every single member of the entourage is either kidnapped or eaten. I had the best time writing this book because it was 1964 in East Africa and Hollywood. I wasn't thinking about COVID-19. It was an escape.
Yeah. You know, I want to just remind folks that Hour of the Witch, wonderful novel. It comes out, you're able to buy it on May 4th, which is fantastic. It is just a wonderful read. We have some questions from the audience, Chris, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
I'd love to ask this. Mary writes, what writer or books have been your inspiration or your motivation or your favorites? Is there a book that you read every year? For me, I have to read The Great Gatsby every year. It's just my favorite book.
Okay, I'm going to leave the camera for 5 seconds.
Okay.
I could have gotten you 100 of these, Crystal, but here's the Russian edition of The Great Gatsby. Here's the Armenian edition of The Great Gatsby.
Wow.
For a long time, I collected weird paperback 1950s editions of The Great Gatsby, including one of my favorites, this one, because Jay Gatsby looks like a vampire, and it says complete and unabridged, because a 40,000 word novel needs to be abridged. Imagine an abridger in 1955 thinking, boats against the current. Do we really need that? Of course, the Robert Redford, Mia Farrow edition of The Great Gatsby. I have got so many editions of The Great Gatsby. I just love it. And yes, last Sunday's New York Times, I was in the buy the book, and they asked that very question. What are some great books?
Yeah.
And of course, I talked about The Great Gatsby, but here are 2 other great books from the last 4 years that I recommend a lot. Rebecca Mackay's The Great Believers, and Amor Towles' A Gentleman in Moscow. Now, most of my friends are writers, so I fear I've just insulted about 90 people. I'm sorry, but those are 2 great books I think about a lot.
When you were talking, and Christina wrote in about ambiguous endings, and you had mentioned your books end with heartbreak or they end with happiness. How do you feel about endings going several ways? How do you feel about an ambiguous ending? Do you feel maybe cheated, or do you need the closure? What do you think about it?
It's a great question. I don't feel cheated. I love ambiguous endings because sometimes life is ambiguous. Now, there's some subjects that don't merit an ambiguous ending. Genocide, there's no ambiguity. But, domestic novels about marriages, sometimes you want an ambiguous ending, and that's okay. Aristotle said, you want an ending that's 2 things, surprising and inevitable. Surprising in that I didn't see that coming. But then you think to yourself, oh my gosh, it couldn't have ended any other way. And so whether it's heartbreak or happiness, I want it to be Aristotelian. And if it's ambiguous, go for it.
Tina writes in, I have read every single one of your books, and in your
Tina, thank you.
Tina loves you. You seem to come out in your earlier work with a new book every 2 years. Now your pace is about once a year. What changed in your life that allowed you to put out a book once a year?
Yeah, it's a great question. There was a period when I was doing almost a book a year. It coincided with my daughter going away to boarding school. The reality is that, oh my God, I love being a dad. And when my daughter lived at home, I'd write from 5 to 7 in the morning, make her breakfast with my wife and pack her lunch, pick her up after school and bring her to dance class or voice class or whatever was going on in her life. But then she went away to boarding school. Suddenly I had more time. And I filled it the only way I knew how, by writing. Now, I have a dog and I love her madly. And my day doesn't begin being in this room at 5 or 6 in the morning. It begins at 7 in the morning because I'm woken up by 43 pounds of rescue dog licking my face, saying, time to go into the woods. And we do. So I get to my, office at 7. And now in the afternoons, I go for long bike rides. And see, now I do a book every 18 months or every 2 years. I mean, the other thing is this. A little of me goes a long way.
Yeah.
No one needs a book from me every year. I'm not Margaret Atwood. I'm not Toni Morrison.
I don't know, though. I think Tina might disagree with that. Many of our viewers right now might disagree with that. You mentioned your writing structure, before starting at 5 to 7 writing, do you have a particular writing structure? And have you had writer's block? What do you do to get out of that?
I'll tell you 2 things. If I have writer's block, it means I haven't done my homework. And I need to do some research. If it's a current book, a contemporary book, I need to call up an expert, an FBI agent, an ER doctor, and ask some questions. If it's historical fiction, I need to call an historian, or I need to do a deep dive into Puritan theology. I need to read an Anne Bradstreet poem. I mean, that's the other thing about Hour of the Witch. You mentioned the thous and these and thines. My muse was one of the most beautiful poets in our history, Anne Bradstreet. Dost dream of things beyond the moon, and dost thou hope to dwell there soon? I mean, Anne Bradstreet, Mary Oliver, Emily Dickinson, they're everything for me. Now, I have 2 writing tips. When I get to this room, I begin by watching movie trailers, those impeccably produced 2-minute videos that immediately catapult me into a particular emotional place. And I do this. I go to the dictionary, and not just any dictionary. This dictionary.
Wow.
It's one of those dictionaries that demands its own library podium.
Yeah.
And I look up words. I look up words I've never used before, words that I don't think I've used before. It's hard to tell for sure after 22 books, but I try to find a word that is beautiful, noctivagant, luminescent, cerulean. And I try to use it that day because as a writer, our principal tool are words. In An Hour of the Witch, because I was using Puritan nomenclature, I found so many beautiful new words.
Yeah.
Pillow bear, shallop, trencher.
Yeah. I have to say, I had a dictionary next to me too, reading your book, just to make sure I could understand what those beautiful new words were in the context of the book.
Thanks,
couple
Crystal.
more questions. We have a question coming from Carl, actually asking, going back to the Puritans and all the beer they would drink, why? Why were they drinking so much beer?
Why did the Puritans drink so much beer? The short answer is they were miserable. No, I don't know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The Puritans didn't understand viruses or germs, but just as the Italians in the Middle Ages and the plague figured out somehow masks helped, they had this sense that there was something about the water that was making them sick. And it was because they didn't yet have North American antibodies.
And that's why they were drinking so much beer.
And when the ship came in, Madeira.
Absolutely. Madeira, so you didn't have to drink all that beer. Anne writes, Anne Bradstreet was my grandmother. 9 times
Well,
back.
she wasn't your grandmother,
9
unless you're about 310. But she was your great grandmother.
She did say, I'm so glad you have made the dive. She did love Simon. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. And I got to tell you, you have got really beautiful DNA inside you. Anyone related to Anne Bradstreet is kind of a rock star in my mind.
Yeah. How about, when do you follow a story outline? Joyce wants to know if you follow a story outline, or do you let the story unfold organically? And I have a friend who's a writer, and he's local. He tells me sometimes, though, that he'll be crying as he's typing because he can't believe what he just did, and he's just allowing for the story to unfold. And he doesn't really have an outline. But I wonder, do you have an outline? Do you know where you want your characters to go, or do you sort of let them do what they need to do?
I'm going to tell you 2 things. One I've said before, or I've never told anyone. The first is this: I don't have an outline. I have no idea where my books are going. I depend on my characters to take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story. I begin with a premise. Alcoholic, hot mess of a flight attendant wakes up next to a dead body far from home, and someone has slashed his neck. Young, beautiful Puritan woman is in a toxic marriage and says, I'm getting out. Her husband plunges the devil's tines into her hands, and she sues for divorce. When I get to the end, when I'm trying to figure out how it ends, then I get out 2 massive whiteboards, and they're in the wall behind me. And I use dry erase markers to plot possible endings. As for weeping, I've never wept when I'm writing, but I've never told anyone this. Sometimes, and my mindfulness expert encourages this, I hate him for it. I love him, but I hate him for it. He encourages me to weep for Emily Shepard in Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, for the Armenians in the Sandcastle Girls, and for everyone who died in Skeletons at the Feast.
I don't know what else to say to that. I find it so beautiful that, these characters that you're sharing with the world mean so much to you in that way. When you see the characters and they take you by the hand and they're taking you on this journey, has any character in particular ever really surprised you with where they're taking you?
Has any character surprised me? Yes. Anahit, or Alexandra in the guest room. She surprised me. She was the sex slave brought from Armenia to New York City and married Deerfield in Hour of the Witch. I was pretty sure I knew her trajectory. I knew her strengths. I knew her demons, because, oh boy, did the Puritans have demons. But Mary Deerfield in Hour of the Witch surprised the hell out of me, as did her friend, basically daughter-in-law,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Peregrine, and her friend, Goody Cooper. They surprised the hell out of me.
They surprised the hell out of me too. Absolutely. The name of the book is Hour of the Witch, and it's a fantastic read. Chris Bohjalian, you have really, really found something special here. I can't wait for everyone to pick up, buy a copy of the book. And as far as the rest of what you're going to be writing, you have your 22nd book that will be coming out soon. We talked a little bit about that. You wrote that during the pandemic, but you took yourself far away from the pandemic in premise with that book. Again, pick up a copy of the book Hour of the Witch by Chris Bohjalian. And yes,
No,
yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, you can pick that up on May 4th.
Crystal, I just wanted to say two things that are really important to me. First of all, I am so proud of so many Americans during this pandemic who kept it together. We are all going to have PTSD a long time when we think of the 600,000 dead, our children scarred forever. But in addition to the amazing frontline workers, ER doctors, grocery store clerks, are the journalists. People like you, Crystal, who day in and day out said, damn it to hell, I will be in the studio. I'm going to broadcast. And there is a distinct heroism to that. And when we look back on the year that Satan spawned, 2020, I hope to God, Crystal, someday you are saying to yourself, son of a gun, I did it. I made the world a better place when the world was going to shit. Sorry about the S word, it just slipped out.
It's okay. Sometimes there is no other word. Well, Chris, I want to say thank you so much for your time today, for this beautiful, wonderful, surprising book. You need to read it. Everyone needs to read it. And I am going to go against what you had said. And the world does need more Chris Bohjalian, by the way. Go ahead, write 2 books a year. We're all going to want those. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us for this very special virtual National Writers Series event. Get the book, read all of Chris's books, even the ones that he doesn't particularly think are good. They're still good, Chris. Thank you so much, and enjoy your week, everyone.
Crystal, thank you. Traverse City, thank you. National Writer Series, thank you.
Bye, guys. Oh.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you'll all continue the conversation by purchasing a copy of Hour of the Witch from your favorite independent bookstore. Thank you again to our donors and major sponsors, Cordia, the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, event underwriter Ann Montgomery, and the Traverse City Record Eagle. This event is also made possible in part by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. And thanks to you, our viewers. Your support makes all the difference, and the proceeds of our events go to our Raising Writers Literacy programs to help share the love of reading and writing. Thank you, and good night.